Good old winter's day out here today. G'day legends. Now, if there's one thing that I'm seriously good at, it's getting myself bogged and getting back out again. And I live by the motto that if you're gonna be dumb, you've gotta be tough. What that means when it comes to four-wheel driving is if you're gonna drive up hills like that or through bonnet deep bog holes, then you've gotta know how to get yourself through and out the other side. Now, I've done a heap of four-wheel driving over the years, both in my gig these days, testing products here at 4WDING Supacentre, and also in a past life as editor of 4WD Action magazine. And these following tips are my top 10 tips for low range four-wheel driving to outdrive your mates. Now, before I get into these tips, do me a favor and take a second to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, because we are absolutely hammering our channel full of cracking camping, four-wheel driving and 12-volt tips, tricks and techniques, and I don't want you to miss any of them. So tip number one is always lower your tire pressures when you're doing tough low range tracks like this. I can't stress it enough. Lowering your tire pressures to suit the terrain allows your tires to mold and conform around the terrain, massively increasing traction. A good starting point for low range dirt and rocky tracks like these is about 20 PSI. Just be aware there's even more risk of rolling a tire off your rim at these low pressures if you hit a rock step or a tree root on a low range track compared to when you're on the sand. So tip number two is to know what you're up against before you face it. That means parking and walking the hill or finding a big stick and poking the bottom of the bog hole before you launch yourself in. Jumping into something without seeing the full picture is a recipe for disaster. Walking the hill or testing the bottom of a bog hole gives you the opportunity to form a game plan and piece together the steps. Left here, right there, avoid this tree root, aim for that rock with your driver's tyre, that sort of stuff. So tip number three closely follows tip number two, and that's all about doing a bit of track building. A couple of well-placed rocks in a hole like that can seriously mean the difference between success and failure. Okay, so let's jump in and I'll give you some tips for being behind the steering wheel. But before I do, I just want to remind you of the golden rule when it comes to low range four-wheel driving. Whenever you're tackling a steep track, always keep your thumbs outside the steering wheel. That way, if one of your front wheels picks up a rock and spins the steering wheel really suddenly, you're not going to catch your thumbs and you're not going to risk breaking your thumbs on the steering wheel. So tip number four is all about gear selection, being in the right gear for the right terrain. Now we're talking low range hills here, so that's pretty obvious. Put the transfer case into low range. Now when it comes to the transmission, if you've got an auto like I do, I just use drive or reverse as I need to. If you've got a manual, I generally try and start in second gear low range for hills. If you really need it, then go for first gear. Tip number five is to always take it slow on your first attempt. If you're charging guns blazing, then you're very likely to bounce offline, do damage, and generally steer your day seriously south. Instead, idle through the first time, keeping the revs low. The best case scenario is that, assuming you pick the right line, which is something we'll talk about in a moment, you idle your way to the top of the hill looking like an off-road legend. Worst case, you lose a bit of momentum, you back up and give it another go. Good four-wheel drivers don't make things look hard, they make them look easy. Okay, so you didn't make it up and over the obstacle using light throttle input? Then tip six is all about using controlled momentum. Sometimes your front and back tyres will want to climb up at the same time, and sometimes the wheel will lift, causing you to lose momentum. In those scenarios, a small amount of controlled momentum is called for. Back up a little, give it a bit more throttle, but only enough to allow you to crest over the obstacle, backing off the throttle as you come up over it. Tip number seven is all about picking the right line. The aim when picking a line is to position your vehicle so that the wheels on each axle stay as even as possible, avoiding lifting one up or letting it drop right down. This will often mean zigzagging your way up a track, avoiding the low spots and aiming for the higher ridges, which is why it's so essential to have walked the hill first so you know where to aim for. So tip number eight is a trick I've been using with great success for years. Good progress off-road is all about being as smooth as possible with your steering, your brake and your throttle input. On a rough track, it's sometimes hard to stop your right leg jumping all around the place, which can upset the throttle. To solve this, jam your foot hard up against the kick panel and use it as a brace to steady your foot and smooth out your throttle. And if you've got a throttle controller, it will definitely help if you set it nice and low to add a bit of delay to the throttle pedal. Tip number 9 is all about understanding the low points on the underside of your vehicle and what's down there that you could get hung up on. Typically, they're things like spring hangers, diff pumpkins, and suspension arms. Know where the low points of your vehicle are and use that knowledge to steer around the highest points of the track. If you aim to put your tyres on the highest safe points, you'll stop high centering on those low hanging undercarriage components. So tip number 10 is one that I wish I'd let sink in years ago, because I guarantee it would have saved me a heap of money over the years. You buy a winch for a reason, right? Outdriving your mates isn't always about making it to the top of the hill the first go, spinning roost and breaking parts as you go. Outdriving your mates is just as much about being able to drive home at the end of the day, get back in your car the next day without having to deal with any breakages. Being able to admit that a hill has got the better of you and choosing to winch over an obstacle isn't a fail, it's a win in my books. Trust me, your wallet will thank you for it. And just one quick parting thought, remember to always carry your own recovery gear, even if it's as simple as a snap strap and a couple of shackles plus a long-handled shovel, because being a capable four-wheel driver is all about being prepared for anything. So there you go, 10 tricks to outdrive your mates on your next tough trip. Now, fair enough, that wasn't the toughest track ever, but to be fair, this isn't the biggest, baddest ute either. You can definitely use those 10 tricks on just about any track though. What do you reckon? Have I missed any? Have you got some tricks yourself? Drop them in the comments below. And remember to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to stay in touch with us for more camping, four-wheel driving and 12 volt tips, tricks and techniques. Catch you next time.